The night started with candlelight, soft music, and the warmth of familiarity. I had spent weeks planning our anniversary dinner, choosing the perfect restaurant, the one where we had our first real date. I even wore the same navy blue blazer she once said made me look irresistible. It was supposed to be a night of laughter, reminiscing, and promises for the future. But instead, it became the moment my world came crashing down. We clinked our wine glasses together, her lips curving into a soft smile. But behind her eyes, there was something. Hesitation? Nerves? Guilt? I couldn't place it at first, but it gnawed at me. The atmosphere felt staged. Like she was going through the motions, performing rather than being present. And then she set her glass down, took a slow breath, and tilted her head. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach tightened. I braced myself, my mind racing through possibilities. Was she sick? Was something wrong with her job? But nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "I met someone." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. The restaurant around us continued as if nothing had changed, the gentle hum of conversations, the clinking of silverware, the distant laughter of a couple enjoying their evening. But my world had just stopped. I stared at her, hoping this was some kind of twisted joke. "What?" She bit her lip like she was struggling to find the right words. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I swear. But I think I have feelings for him." The candle between us flickered, casting shadows on her face. I searched her expression for regret, guilt, anything, but what I saw instead made my breath hitch. Relief. Like she had been holding onto this secret for so long, and now that it was out, she could finally breathe again. Meanwhile, I felt like I was suffocating. My hands trembled under the table, but I forced them to stay still. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice surprisingly even. "On our anniversary, the night I took you to the place where we fell in love, you decide to tell me you have feelings for another man?" She swallowed hard but nodded. I thought it was the right time. The right time. Something inside me cracked. I looked down at my plate, the perfectly seared steak I had barely touched. The evening I had carefully planned, now reduced to nothing. And yet, the worst part wasn't her confession. It was the way she said it. Not with hesitation. Not with sorrow. But with certainty. She had already made up her mind. And I was just the last person to find out. The drive back home was silent. Not the kind of comfortable silence we used to share when words weren't needed, when just being together was enough. No, this was suffocating, an unbearable weight pressing down on me. The streetlights passed in long, golden streaks, but I barely noticed. My mind was still replaying her words, dissecting every expression, every flicker of emotion in her voice. "I met someone." The words felt like a foreign language, something my brain refused to process fully. The weight of them crushed me in waves, each repetition cutting deeper. I stole a glance at her. She sat in the passenger seat, her fingers interlocked in her lap, her shoulders tense. Not a single word since the restaurant. No apology. No attempt to soften the blow. Just silence. I should have said something. Yelled. Demanded answers. But I was too busy trying to breathe. When we pulled into the driveway, she reached for the door handle before I even cut the engine. I let her go inside first, needing a few extra seconds to collect myself. When I finally stepped inside, the warmth of our home, once comforting, once ours, felt unfamiliar. The framed photos on the entryway table, the scent of the lavender candle she always lit before bed, even the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, it all felt wrong. Like I was walking into a place that no longer belonged to me. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. I stood at the threshold, watching her, waiting for something, an explanation, an ounce of regret, anything. She finally turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine. "I didn't want to hide it from you anymore," she said. "I thought you deserved the truth." I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through my hair. "The truth? You think telling me on our anniversary, no less, that you have feelings for someone else is some kind of noble act?" She flinched, but she didn't back down. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "But you did." My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "You didn't even hesitate. Do you even care?" For a moment, she just stared at me. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a breath. "I do care, Elbert. But I can't pretend anymore. I've been feeling this way for a while. It's not fair to either of us if I keep lying." Her words felt like static in my ears. Not fair to either of us. I let that sink in. The audacity of it. The absurdity of her framing this as some kind of mutual burden, as if I had any say in her choices, in her betrayal. I clenched my jaw. "Who is he?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to ask. "It doesn't matter." I laughed again, this time hollow. "It matters to me." She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't some random crush. It wasn't meaningless. This was real. His name is Marcus, she admitted finally. We met at work. I felt something in my chest tighten. How long? Her fingers curled around the glass in her hands. A few months. Months. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. So while I was planning this anniversary, while I was thinking about our future, you were, what? Sneaking around with some guy from your office. She looked away, shame flickering across her face. But shame wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough to erase the image forming in my mind of her laughing with him, texting him, making excuses to stay late at work. Of her choosing him over me again and again. Elbert, I held up a hand. Don't. The air between us felt suffocating. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. Without another word, I turned and walked out the front door, letting it slam behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. I walked. I didn't know how long or where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The cold air bit at my face, but I barely felt it. My thoughts were too loud, too overwhelming, drowning out everything else. Months. She had been lying to me for months. While I came home every night thinking she was tired from work, she was thinking about someone else. While I kissed her goodnight, she had another man's name lingering on her lips. While I was planning our anniversary, she was making plans of her own, plans that didn't include me. I stopped at a bench near a park we used to visit when we first moved into town. Back then, we would come here on warm summer nights, lying on the grass, pointing out constellations, talking about everything and nothing. The memories felt like they belonged to another life. Another couple. Not us. Not anymore. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling sharply. How had I not seen it? Had I been that blind? Or had I simply refused to acknowledge the signs? Maybe it was both. A notification buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, then hesitated. What if it was her? I pulled out my phone. But it wasn't her. It was a message from my best friend, Curtis. Hey man, happy anniversary. You two doing anything special? A fresh wave of nausea hit me. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I supposed to say? Actually, my wife just admitted she's in love with another guy. How's your night going? Instead, I turned off my phone and shoved it back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cold creeping into my skin. My thoughts twisted and unraveled, shifting from heartbreak to anger, back and forth like a pendulum. I tried to remember the last time she had said she loved me. The last time she had looked at me the way she used to. Had it been weeks? Months? Had I simply convinced myself we were fine because the alternative was too painful to consider? I thought back to dinner, the way she had said it calmly, like she had rehearsed it a dozen times in her head before finally speaking the words aloud. I met someone. Not I'm sorry. Not I regret it. Not even it was a mistake. No. She had made her choice. And I was just collateral damage. The return to a broken home. By the time I finally made it back to the house, it was late. The street was quiet, the lights in most of the neighboring homes already turned off. I stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the front door. For the first time, I didn't want to go inside. But I had no choice. This was still my home. My life. I wasn't going to let her take that away from me too. When I walked in, the living room light was on, casting a soft glow over the space. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her arms crossed over her chest. Waiting. Her eyes flickered up to mine the moment I stepped in, but I didn't say anything. I just walked past her, heading straight for the kitchen. I needed water. Or maybe something stronger. Elbert. I ignored her. Pulled a glass from the cabinet. Turned on the tap. I didn't expect you to be gone that long. I let out a hollow laugh, filling the glass. Yeah, well, I needed some air. A beat of silence. I could feel her watching me as if she was trying to gauge my emotions, trying to figure out what came next. I don't want to fight, she said softly. I set the glass down with a little more force than necessary. You think I want to fight? You think I want to be having this conversation at all? She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she shifted, tucking her legs beneath her. I didn't tell you to hurt you. Then why did you? I turned to face her, gripping the edge of the counter. Why now? Why tonight? She hesitated. Then she sighed. Because I knew if I didn't, I'd keep lying. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I stared at her, my pulse hammering in my ears. You say that like it's some kind of noble act. Like you're doing me a favor. She exhaled sharply. That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? My voice was rising now, but I didn't care. That this just happened? That you just fell for someone else? Her jaw tensed. I don't expect you to understand. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't expect me to understand? You're right. I don't. Because while I was here, loving you, believing in us, you were somewhere else. With him. Her gaze dropped to the floor. She didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. A decision that couldn't wait. I raked a hand through my hair, trying to think through the haze of emotions suffocating me. What now, huh? Do you want me to just accept this? Pretend this is normal? What's your plan, Lena? She flinched at the sharpness of my voice, but she didn't shy away. I don't know. I laughed again, shaking my head. You don't know. No, she lifted her gaze, and for the first time I saw something there. Fear. Doubt. As if she had expected me to react differently. As if she had expected me to crumble, to beg her to stay. And maybe before tonight I would have. But something inside me had cracked. I'm not going to beg you to choose me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I won't be some backup plan while you figure out what you really want. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. I turned away, my hands curling into fists. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. Elbert? I ignored her. Walked past her. Made my way upstairs. The bedroom door loomed at the end of the hallway. The bed we had shared for years, the space where we had whispered our dreams and fears, where we had built a life together. Suddenly, I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping there. I opened the guest room door instead, stepped inside, and shut it behind me. The moment I was alone, the weight of everything crashed into me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaling shakily. Tonight, everything had changed. And no matter what happened next, there was no going back. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting across from me at that restaurant, her lips forming those words over and over again. I met someone. I met someone. I met someone. At some point, exhaustion must have pulled me under because I woke up to the faint sound of movement downstairs. The first thing I felt was disorientation, followed immediately by a sharp, crushing weight in my chest as reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I pushed myself up, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to process the nightmare that wasn't a nightmare at all. It was my life now. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds. Morning. My head ached, my throat was dry, and my body felt like it had been drained of all its energy. I had no idea what time it was, but I could hear Lena moving around in the kitchen, opening cabinets, closing drawers. For a second, I wondered if she was making breakfast. Like everything was normal. The thought sent a new surge of anger through me. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and checked the time. A few messages from Curtis, another from my sister, just checking in. Nothing from Lena. She hadn't tried to say anything since last night. Maybe she thought there was nothing left to say. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the room. As I walked downstairs, the sound of sizzling filled the air, followed by the familiar scent of eggs and toast. I stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. Lena stood at the stove, her back to me, flipping an egg with a spatula like she had done every morning for years. Like this was just any other day. She turned slightly when she sensed me there, her expression unreadable. Morning. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, at the absurdity of this scene. Was she really going to pretend this was fine? That we were fine? She set the spatula down, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. I made coffee. I let out a humorless chuckle. Is that supposed to fix things? Her shoulders tensed. I just thought, she trailed off, glancing at the floor. I didn't know how else to start the day. I stepped into the kitchen, crossing my arms. How about starting by telling me the truth? She turned fully now, her face carefully guarded. I did tell you the truth. I scoffed. No. You told me the part that was convenient for you. The part you wanted off your chest. What you haven't told me is what happens next. Her fingers curled around the edge of the counter. I don't know. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. You keep saying that, but that's not good enough. You've had months to think about this, Lena. You've had time to process it, to make your choices. But I haven't. You dropped this on me like a bomb, and now I'm just supposed to sit here and wait while you figure it out. I didn't mean to blindside you, she said quietly. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mounting. Then when were you going to tell me? Another month from now? A year? Or were you waiting until you had your decision neatly wrapped up with a bow? She swallowed. I didn't know how to tell you without hurting you. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations. You failed. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, I sighed. Are you in love with him? Her breath hitched, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. A hesitation. A conflict. And then, the worst answer of all. I don't know. I stared at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. You don't know. She looked down at her hands. I have feelings for him. But I love you too, Elbert. Too. That word sent an icy chill down my spine. Too. Like love was something you could divide up, portion out. Like it was a commodity, not a commitment. I clenched my jaw. Then why are we having this conversation? Tears welled in her eyes. Because I needed to be honest. Honest? My voice rose slightly. Honest would have been telling me the moment you felt something for him. Not after you've been sneaking around behind my back for months. She flinched at that. Good. I took a slow, shaky breath. Do you want to be with him? A beat of silence. I don't know. There it was again. That damn answer. The one that told me everything I needed to know. I turned away from her, gripping the edge of the sink, my knuckles white. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating, unbearable. She had already made her choice. Maybe she hadn't said it outright, but it was there, in every hesitation, in every vague answer. And I was done waiting. I turned back to her, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not going to be your second option, Lena. I'm not going to sit around while you figure out if I'm worth choosing. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Elbert, I need space. She blinked at me, startled. What? I need space, I repeated, the decision settling in my chest. I'm going to stay with Curtis for a few days. You can have the house. You can have your time to think. But I won't be here waiting for you to decide if I'm good enough. Panic flashed in her eyes. You're leaving. I nodded. Yeah, I am. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I don't know if I can handle losing you, she whispered. I let out a breath, looking at her, really looking at her. The woman I had built my life with. The woman I thought I knew. You lost me the moment you let someone else into your heart, I said. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out the door. For the first time in years, I had no idea where I was going. But at least now I was the one making the choice. The cold air hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and unforgiving, but I welcomed it. It was better than the suffocating weight of being in that house, surrounded by the echoes of a life that suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I got into my car and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breath. The house loomed in the rearview mirror, warm and familiar, yet now entirely foreign. I had spent years building a life in that home, picking out furniture together, painting walls, arguing over which rug worked best in the living room. It wasn't just a house. It was ours. And now it felt like a crime scene. I exhaled sharply and started the engine. My hands felt stiff, my body drained. I didn't have a plan, only one thought repeating over and over again. I couldn't stay there. I drove. The roads were empty, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one hitting me like a bullet. I needed to talk to someone, Curtis. He had always been the guy I could count on. We had been friends since college, roommates for a while before I got married. He had been the best man at our wedding, the guy who had told me I was making the best decision of my life. That thought alone nearly made me laugh. What a joke. I tapped his number on my phone screen and pressed it to my ear. It rang once. Twice. Then his groggy voice. Dude, it's like 2 a.m. I hesitated. For a second I thought about just hanging up, but then the words tumbled out. Lena cheated. There was a pause. A long one. Then his voice was suddenly alert. Wait. What? I swallowed hard. She told me tonight. Over dinner. She met someone. The words felt like acid in my mouth. A string of curses flew out of him. Are you serious? That he stopped himself, exhaling sharply. Where are you? I'm driving. I was going to come crash at your place. Yeah. Of course. Doors open, man. It here safe. I hung up and kept driving, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I pulled up to Curtis's apartment, my body felt numb. He was already waiting at the door, his hair a mess, his expression a mix of exhaustion and concern. I barely made it inside before he pulled me into a rough hug, clapping me on the back. I'm so sorry, man. That nearly broke me. Because no one had said that yet. Not even Lena. I let out a shaky breath as he pulled away. Thanks. Come on, he said, leading me inside. I've got beer. And if that doesn't help, I think my neighbor still has that weird moonshine he tried to poison me with last Christmas. I let out a small, bitter chuckle. Tempting. He gestured to the couch. Sit. Talk. I collapsed onto it, rubbing my hands over my face. I don't even know where to start. Start from the beginning. And so I did. I told him everything. The dinner. The way she had planned to tell me as if it was just another conversation. The way she didn't even sound conflicted. How she kept saying she didn't know what she wanted, but the truth was she had already made her decision. When I finished, Curtis was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head. Unbelievable. Yeah. No, I mean really. Like, what kind of person does that? On your freaking anniversary? He ran a hand through his hair. Dude, I knew something was off with her lately, but I never thought. He stopped himself. I frowned. Wait. What? He hesitated. Look, I didn't want to say anything before because I didn't know anything for sure. But the last few months, she's just been off. She stopped coming to stuff. Always had some excuse for why she couldn't hang out with the group. And when she did show up, she was always glued to her phone. My stomach twisted. And you didn't think to tell me? He winced. I didn't want to be that guy, man. The paranoid best friend accusing your wife of something I had no proof of. I couldn't even be mad at him. Because I hadn't seen it either. I leaned back against the couch, exhaling sharply. God, how did I not notice? Because you trusted her, he said, voice firm. Because you're a good guy and you believed in your marriage. That's not on you. That's on her. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. We sat there for a while in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Curtis handed me a beer and I took a sip, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Then he turned to me. So, what now? I stared at the floor, my mind racing. What now? I didn't have an answer. Because the life I had spent years building had just shattered in front of me. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I woke up on Curtis's couch to the sound of a car alarm blaring somewhere in the distance. My eyes felt gritty, my head heavy, like I'd barely slept at all. The events of the night before came rushing back in a brutal wave, knocking the breath out of me. For a split second, I had that strange, disorienting feeling of not knowing where I was. The couch was unfamiliar, the ceiling above me all wrong, and then I remembered I wasn't home. I wasn't in our bed. And the reason why hit me like a gut punch. Lena. I sat up slowly, running a hand through my hair. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the muffled sounds of traffic outside. Curtis was nowhere to be seen, but the smell of coffee lingered in the air, meaning he was at least awake. I forced myself up and padded into the kitchen, where I found him standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone with a mug in his hand. He glanced up when he saw me. Morning. If you can call it that. I grunted in response, rubbing my face. How late is it? Almost noon. I blinked. Shit. He gestured toward the counter. Made coffee. Figured you'd need it. I muttered a thanks and grabbed a mug, but as I lifted it to my lips, I realized my hands were shaking. Not violently, but enough to make the coffee ripple against the rim of the cup. Curtis noticed. You okay? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. What do you think? He didn't push, just leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. She texted you? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, knowing the answer before I even looked. The screen was blank. No messages. No missed calls. She doesn't even care, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Curtis scoffed. Or she's freaking out and has no idea what to say. I didn't know which was worse. I took a long sip of coffee, trying to push down the rising nausea in my stomach. I need to go back. Curtis's eyes narrowed. Back where? I exhaled. Home. His jaw tensed. Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't have a choice. I set the mug down, gripping the edge of the counter. I can't just leave my whole life hanging in limbo while she sits there deciding if she wants to be with me or him. Curtis nodded slowly. Fair. But don't let her manipulate you into thinking you did something wrong. I shot him a look. I'm not an idiot. He held up his hands. Didn't say you were. But I know you, man. You love her. And love makes people do stupid shit. He wasn't wrong. I finished my coffee in silence, then grabbed my jacket. Thanks for letting me crash here. Curtis clapped me on the shoulder. Anytime. And hey, whatever happens, you're not alone, all right? I nodded, but I didn't say anything. Because deep down, I did feel alone. More than I ever had in my life. The drive back home felt surreal, like I was approaching some kind of battlefield. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was still there. She hadn't left. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, willing myself to move. To get out. To face whatever this was. Then, with a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug, staring blankly out the window. The second she heard me, she turned, her face pale. Elbert. Her voice was small, hesitant. I set my keys on the counter. We need to talk. She nodded, setting her mug down. Yeah. We do. I sat across from her, folding my hands together. I want the truth. All of it. No more half answers. No more I don't knows. She swallowed hard. Okay. I clenched my jaw. Are you still seeing him? She hesitated. For too long. My heart plummeted. You are. She squeezed her eyes shut. Elbert, it's not like that, eh? What the hell does that mean? My voice came out rougher than I intended. She exhaled shakily. I haven't slept with him. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, well. That's great. That makes this so much better. She flinched. I swear it was never physical. I shook my head. Do you really think that makes it any less of a betrayal? You gave him parts of yourself that belonged to me. You turned to him when you should have turned to me. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Why him? I asked, my voice quiet now. What does he have that I don't? She bit her lip, looking down at her lap. It wasn't about that. Then what? I don't know. I slammed my fist against the table, making her jump. Don't give me that bullshit, Lena. You do know. Her shoulders trembled. I felt lost. I felt like something was missing. I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. And instead of talking to me, you ran to him. She nodded, barely meeting my eyes. I was so tired. I had spent years giving everything to this marriage. Every ounce of love, effort, and trust one had. And in return, she had given me this. I ran a hand over my face, suddenly feeling like I had aged 10 years overnight. I deserve better than this, I said, my voice hoarse. Her breath hitched. Elbert, I don't want an apology. I stood up, pushing the chair back. I don't even want an explanation anymore. She blinked up at me. What does that mean? It means I'm done waiting for you to decide. I grabbed my keys. I'll be back later. When I am, I expect you to have an answer. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She knew I was right. And for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel like I was clinging to something broken. Because no matter what happened next, I wouldn't be second choice. I drove aimlessly. The city blurred past me, a mess of neon lights, distant car horns, and the muffled hum of a world that kept moving, completely indifferent to the fact that my life was crumbling. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stay in that house, waiting for Lena to figure out if she still wanted to be my wife. She had already made her choice. She just didn't have the courage to say it. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I should have seen it coming. No one just accidentally falls for someone else. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the small things, the quiet betrayals, the secrets kept, the slow shift from us to him and her. And the worst part? I let it happen. I had been so wrapped up in believing we were fine, in trusting her, that I ignored every warning sign. The late nights at work. The guarded way she checked her phone. The distance between us growing wider every day. It was all there. I just didn't want to see it. My stomach churned. I hadn't eaten anything since the disastrous anniversary dinner, but the thought of food made me nauseous. I ended up pulling into the parking lot of an old diner, one of those places that had been around for decades, where the coffee was always a little burnt and the waitresses called you hun. It wasn't fancy, but that's exactly why I liked it. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers in the back and an older man reading a newspaper at the counter. I slid into a booth near the window, exhaling heavily. A waitress appeared a few moments later, smiling politely. What can I get you, hon? Coffee. Black. She nodded and disappeared. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. The weight of the past 24 hours pressed down on me like a boulder. And then, like some kind of cruel joke, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out slowly, staring at the screen. Lena. I hesitated. My pulse quickened. I almost didn't open it. But then my thumb moved on its own and I read the message. We need to talk. Please. I scoffed under my breath. Talk? Now she wanted to talk? Where was this urgency before she let our marriage rot? Before she decided that my love wasn't enough? The waitress returned with my coffee, setting it down with a small smile. Rough night? I let out a dry laugh. You have no idea. She lingered for a second like she wanted to say something else, but then just patted the edge of the table and walked off. I stared at my phone again. I should ignore her. I should leave her sitting in that house, stewing in the mess she created. But a part of me, a stupid, broken part, still needed to hear what she had to say. I exhaled sharply and typed back. I'll be home soon. The house was dimly lit when I returned, like she hadn't bothered to turn on the main lights. Just a lamp near the couch casting a soft glow. Lena sat there, curled up with a blanket, staring down at her hands. When I stepped inside, she looked up and for the first time in a long time I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing control. Because for once, she wasn't the one holding the cards. She opened her mouth, then closed it like she was struggling to find the right words. I didn't help her. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, she spoke. I don't want to lose you. The words sent a sharp pang through my chest, but I didn't let it show. I laughed bitterly. You should have thought about that before you let someone else into our marriage. Her expression crumpled. It wasn't like that. Stop. I held up a hand. I don't want more excuses. I don't know. I want the truth, Lena. She swallowed hard. The truth is, I was unhappy. I felt something inside me snap. And instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else? My voice was low, controlled, but the rage burned just beneath the surface. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't plan for it to happen. But it did. She nodded, looking away. It did. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. What do you want from me? Her gaze snapped back to mine. I want to fix this. I stared at her, waiting for the words to feel real. But they didn't. Because deep down, I knew something she wasn't ready to admit. She didn't want to fix our marriage. She wanted to fix the consequences. She wanted to ease her guilt, to undo the damage without having to truly face it. I shook my head. You can't take this back, Lena. You don't get to hit undo and expect me to pretend it never happened. She wiped at her face. I love you. I let out a humorless laugh. You love me, but you wanted him? She flinched. I made a mistake. I sighed. No, Lena. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is buying the wrong kind of coffee. You made a choice. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No desire to make this easier for her. No sadness for what we were losing. Because we had already lost it. I took a deep breath. I'll sleep in the guest room again. She lifted her head, eyes wide. Elbert, please. I need time. My voice was quiet but firm. And I don't know if I can ever forgive this. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there, drowning in the mess she created. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the one who was broken. I felt like the one who had just woken up. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I lay on the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind an endless loop of everything that had happened. Every word. Every hesitation. Every excuse. And the worst part? None of it changed the reality of what she had done. By the time the first traces of dawn crept through the blinds, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to fight for someone who had already let go. I got up, pulled on a shirt, and walked downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Lena was sitting on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, dark circles under them. She must have cried herself to sleep. Good. She looked up the moment she heard my footsteps, her expression hopeful for a split second before she saw my face. Something in her eyes shifted. Fear. She knew. I stood there, arms crossed. We're done, Lena. Her whole body jerked as if I had slapped her. Elbert, wait. No, my voice was calm, steady. I gave you a chance to tell me the truth. I gave you time to decide. And I see it now, you already did decide. The second you let someone else in, you made your choice. I'm just the last one to accept it. Tears welled up again. I don't want this. I scoffed. You wanted him. And now that you're losing me, you suddenly don't know what you want. She stood up, desperate now. Please. Let's go to therapy. Let's work through this. I'll do anything. I shook my head. You don't want to fix our marriage, Lena. You want to fix how guilty you feel. Her lips parted, but she had no defense. Because I was right. I stepped past her, heading for the staircase. I'm packing a bag. I'll be staying somewhere else while we figure out the legal stuff. She let out a broken sob. You don't have to do this. We can rebuild it. I turned to face her, my chest tight. You burned it down. I'm just walking away from the ashes. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. But I didn't stay to watch. I went upstairs, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Every item I folded, every drawer I emptied, it all felt surreal. This was my home. My life. And now I was walking away from it, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. When I was done, I took one last look at the room, the bed we had shared, the pictures on the dresser, the memories embedded in the walls. Then, without hesitation, I grabbed my bag and walked out. Lena was still sitting on the couch, silent tears streaming down her face. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't owe her that. I walked out the front door, closed it behind me, and took my first breath as a free man. It still hurt. But for the first time in a long time, I knew I'd be okay.